webinar.
Thank you, Beverly, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so why this topic today? Increased regulation, global competition, and the large number of expiring patents are pressing sponsors, large pharma companies as well as small biotechs, to find ways to optimize the conduct and the cost of clinical trials without sacrificing efficiency. Outsourcing is one of the strategies largely used to achieve these goals. Although widely spread throughout the industry, why are these strategies not always successful? In addition, authorities' guidance on ultimate responsibility for quality and integrity of clinical trial data associated with the outsourced activities must be carefully addressed. So the purpose for this webinar is to list the challenges for a successful collaboration between the sponsor and the functional CRO. This will be addressed with suggestions on how to achieve the primary goal of gaining in efficiency and cost effectiveness. As a start, let's review some of the basic principles. I will then address the advantages of outsourcing, its challenges, and solutions to overcome this. So when I mention CRO in this presentation, I'm referring to a functional CRO providing e-clinical and biostatistical services, which correspond to my experience at Iddi. I'm making this distinction because there are different working models that can be envisaged. In-house implies that all activities will be performed by the sponsor employees. Insourcing refers to a model where part of the sponsor team is made up of external staff fully dedicated to the sponsor, most of the time co-located together with the internal team and using client systems and applications. Offshoring, also called embedded teams in some cases, is a model where the sponsor uses resources, usually fully dedicated, working on sponsor systems and applications, and who act as an extension of the internal team. This model is often used with low-cost countries. Functional outsourcing refers to the outsourcing of specific activities to a third party. This is the model offered by Iddi. Full outsourcing, finally, is the model where the sponsor gives the responsibility of the full project to a single CRO who will manage all activities for a study. A question needs to be addressed when outsourcing. Which procedure to use? Is the partner working according to his process or according to sponsor's ones? In the second case, the need for training and monitoring is important. This will work better with insourcing and offshoring models rather than with functional and full outsourcing. To close this preamble, let's ask ourselves the question, who's the sponsor? Sponsors ranges from small biotechs with no internal resources, processes, and sometimes little knowledge, to large pharmas with well-established processes they expect the CRO to follow. Expectations will be completely different from one sponsor to the other, and this can be really challenging for the CRO to adapt. So why outsourcing? Well, because it represents an opportunity to improve cost and efficiency in development at a time of significant downsizing throughout the industry. It also limits the fixed cost. On top of this, it allows sponsors to benefit from specific expertise they might not have internally, and it enables the trial portfolio to grow without having to increase permanent staff. Then there is also one major advantage, flexibility. But what does this mean? First of all, the ability to absorb peaks and lulls in activity. It also means adapted resources with the required skills to face the requirements. The sponsor staff will be freed from day-to-day routine tasks and will be able to focus on more strategic and added value duties. Last but not least, having an external eye brings new ideas and challenges the processes in place. So, ultimately, outsourcing is a good solution to increase the sponsor operational efficiency. Of course, outsourcing is appealing, but one shouldn't forget the associated challenges. I do not pretend to give an exhaustive list of challenges, but I will list the major ones I have experienced. First of all, working with remote resources means that you need to plan your communication, as you can't just pop up in someone's office, and there is no informal exchange at the coffee machine. The sponsor and the CRO might even be located in different time zones, which implies the need to adapt your work schedule accordingly. Note that you can also turn this in a real advantage. Iddi, for instance, works for lots of US-based clients. We obviously work during European business hours and deliver material by the end of our business hours. This has the added value that the sponsor can start reviewing it and have comments over to us by the next day. So it's more like the advantage of shift work in this case. Common language in the industry is usually English, but this can sometimes be a burden when you work with non-native speakers, both on sponsor or CRO side. Then there are the cultural differences. There are two challenges linked to this. The absolute need to anticipate that people will react differently depending on their culture, education, etc., but also that you will be faced by two different company cultures. The more culturally aligned the two organizations are, the more likely strong relationships can be developed. The next challenge is that the sponsor staff might well see the outsourcing as a threat, such as taking away things they like to do or losing control over their day-to-day work and deliverables. Management on the sponsor side can't just ignore this, or they put the outsourcing initiative at risk. CRO staff is usually assigned to several projects, and sometimes they are overloaded when they have conflicting deadlines for different sponsors. Anticipating this is key to the success. And what about the staff turnover? By this, I'm not only referring to the CRO, but also the sponsor. I mentioned this as we had a specific case at Iddi where we had to answer the authorities' question, as we were the only ones in the project who managed to keep the same staff from the beginning till the end. The risk associated to a high turnover rate is that you will need to rework the communication each time, to build the trust again and again, and sometimes even revise agreements and expectations. All this can lead to a drop in efficiency. Then small biotech and even bigger companies can be acquired by a larger company who might not have the same expectation than what was agreed upon in the first place. To add to this, several third parties are often involved, and this no doubt increases the complexity of the communication. On the other hand, this has the advantage of choosing best in class for each activity. Communication might sound like a cliché, but it still represents one of the main challenges. Open and transparent communication enables a partnership to flourish so that new approaches can come to light and issues solved quickly. In-depth and descriptive details around planned work, required resources, and associated costs are consistent themes in identifying areas for improvement. Sponsor reports that CROs can demonstrate a lack of transparency around billing, poor communication regarding activity status and issues, and an inconsistent commitment to project deliverables. CROs, on the other hand, indicate that there is significant opportunity for improvement in defining the extent of work to be done and to communicate effectively around work details and expectations. The selection process is your first step to be successful in your outsourcing initiative. If you want to increase the benefits of the partnership, this should be a long-lasting one based on mutual trust. So the advice is to not compare offers based on the price only, or you might end up comparing apples and pears. There are obviously other factors to take into account, which I will develop later. Do not play the blame game. This is not leading anywhere. The sponsor has to accept the fact that their partner might make errors. Just because you pay for the service does not mean that it will be error-free, as it's still performed by human beings. Keep in mind we all make mistakes, even you. Finally, sponsors need to ensure the appropriate oversight of the partners, and I will go more in details in the next slide. So, why is oversight needed? Well, simply because regulation says that a sponsor is ultimately responsible for the quality of the filing. Authorities might criticize the sponsor for not taking a collaborative role in its interaction with the CRO. And during regulation inspections, authorities may ask what systems and processes have been put in place to ensure that the quality of the CRO works meets expectations. The FDA suggests that designation of responsibilities and assignments are to be described in writing to ensure clear understanding of which party is participating in which activity and is responsible for which deliverables. Although this is usually addressed in the service agreement between sponsor and CRO, the details associated with such assignment can be vague and incomplete, setting both parties up for potential consequences from a regulatory and competitive point of view. This concept will require training on the sponsor side, especially if they were used to perform all tasks internally. Don't forget that someone technically good might not be the right person to oversight a CRO, whereas someone with good interpersonal skills might do a better job. Now that we've listed some of the challenges, let's see what IDDI recommends. So this is the summary of what I will detail. We will see that the partner approach based on mutual trust will address several challenges. I will come back to the importance of the partner selection for a long-lasting relationship. Metrics will help to address concerns in a factual way. And finally, satisfaction surveys can also measure the efficacy of the relationship. So what are the fundamentals of the partnership? First, CRO and sponsor will need to discuss goals and expectations from the sponsor point of view. The role and responsibilities in the partnership will have to be detailed. Efforts need to be made to understand each other's culture. Along the road, sponsor and CRO need to discuss pain points and areas in need for assistance. Building a strong communication pathway is key, and this can be split in 4 points. First, establishing a communication plan from the very beginning. Then setting clear guidelines for issue escalation. Organizing regular meetings regardless of the mean. This will keep communication flowing and ensure everyone is on the same level. Don't forget to maximize time in agenda preparation and make sure minutes are shared. Finally, encourage phone conversations. Emails are still too often seen as a communication tool, where in fact it's really only a way to share information. They are subject to interpretation and sometimes generate frustrations. A short conversation is better than a long email. Finally, a kickoff meeting at initial start of the relationship and for each new project is essential. What should the vendor do in order to build the perfect partnership? First of all, he will have to initiate the relationship and assign a strong team of individuals whose qualification and availability best suits the client needs. The vendor management must ensure his team meets goals and deadlines. Then he will need to foster the communication. He must also ensure regular updates are provided to the sponsor and be transparent about any issue. Those elements are key to build trust in the relationship. Finally, checking sponsor satisfaction on a regular basis will be a good means to improve the partnership and make the sponsor feel that he is heard. Now, what should the sponsor do to help build this partnership? First of all, ensure internal foundations are sane by ensuring its staff is buying in the outsourcing model chosen. Too often you might hear statements such as, well, it's my baby, my study is too complex, they will never know the project as well as I do, how can you work with someone remotely, we will spend double the time managing the CRO, and so on. So the negative reaction might be quite important. The second step will be to have clear goals and objectives defined and communicated to the CRO together with the needed information to meet them. The sponsor must remain available for assistance throughout the project duration, particularly at the initiation of the project, but also throughout the life of the project. This Dilbert strip here illustrates how it can go very wrong if this is not done. If the sponsor was used to perform the task internally, he will have to be willing to change processes to include the fact that part of the activity is externalized. Just as the vendor, the sponsor will need to foster the communication. Sponsor will have to define meaningful oversight metrics that will help him gauge the success of the collaboration. He should not fear to give honest feedback and address issues immediately. If you don't speak out, how do you expect the CRO to adapt as needed? Finally, the sponsor will institute a true partnership with his vendor. But how do you know if your partnership is working? There are clear indicators for that. When it is working, you will see strong communication between teams, mutual respect and trust, which is the opposite of the contractor mentality, of the culture of throwing work over the fence. You will see anticipation of needs on both sides, two-way sharing of knowledge and expertise. The teams will be able to handle bumps in the road. High job satisfaction both on the sponsor and CRO side will result in higher retention rates. Finally, you will notice good team spirit, which is reflected in time invested in the project and motivation. The ideal partner-driven approach is based on 3 pillars that I will illustrate with the example of Iddi. First, the expertise to solve present and future problems is essential to deliver services that creates value and that achieves client's goal. In the case of IDDI, this would be the ability to propose and handle complex statistical models, or oncology and ophthalmology expertise, and our randomization, coding, and EDC systems. Then comes the experience. A successful track record in the activity represents the first step to trust for a long-term relationship. In the case of IDDI, this would be more than 20 years providing biostat and e-clinical services. Finally, the enthusiasm, an essential element for a successful partnership. The can-do approach is vital for anticipating and addressing problems. An enthusiastic culture drives to look at ways to improve the service to the partner. And enthusiasm is necessary to establishing strong long-term strategic relationships with partners and building customer loyalty. As you want to enter in a long-term partnership based on trust and collaboration, the partner selection is even more important, and that is what we will discuss in the next slide. As I already said, selecting your partner based on cost only is the worst thing you could do. You also need to look at experience and expertise. You need to answer questions like, how long has the CRO been in business? Do they have experience with similar or complex work? Do they have the ability to scale up to adapt to my needs? Have they ever been involved in communication with regulatory agencies? Do they know about submission requirements? It's also vital to look at how ongoing training is offered to staff from the provider to remain on the cutting edge, and I mean by this attendance to training and conference. And if an initiation plan is in place for newcomers to ensure a smooth upscale of the team when needed. Having a dedicated project manager, particularly when several tasks and projects are handed over to the partner, is key in successful communication and managing specific process improvement, lessons learned, and solving issues. Other information that you need to gather is about the financial stability of the partner. Check also the turnover rate. As I mentioned, this can impact the efficiency in the relationship. Look for referrals if you do not have experience with the partner yet. It's difficult to judge the work quality, so having testimonials from previous customers is one of the ways to check this. The sponsor needs to pay a visit to the potential partner. Audits are too often seen as a necessary boring step after a deal is almost closed, but they should instead help you to make the right choice, as this is another way of knowing who the partner is. Sponsors also need to be realistic in their request and accept that the CRO may say no. If they do so, it is for the sake of the relationship. For example, do not expect your partner to be able to start the next day on your project, as this could be the sign of three possibilities. First, you are very lucky, which is not likely the real reason. Or their staff is not fully busy, and this is definitively not a good sign. Worst case scenario, they are not saying the truth right from the beginning, and you can expect delays in the setup phase, and who knows what other surprise will pop up during the study duration. Last but not least, trust your gut feeling. It might seem irrational, but most of the time it is right. Metrics will help address concerns in a factual way. It will ease communication and demonstrate oversight. Key performance indicators should be agreed upon between the parties. For example, query handling, which will show the percentage of queries correctly generated. Query closing, which will give the time from the query answer to query closed, etc. Reports and project dashboards are tools which can facilitate communication so that information can be displayed in real time to assess performance and can be shared regularly to all parties involved. For example, a query metrics report which will give the number of outstanding, answered, closed queries. Data processing status which will give the number of ECRF entered, source data verified, logged, and signed. Edit check frequency report to identify problems area. Ranking of edit check firing will show edit checks that might have been wrongly programmed or even need of site retraining on some specific part of the CRF. To make sure that your metrics are meaningful, you will obviously need to review them. Review the numbers and see what they can reveal. Review the formulas and assumptions to adapt the metrics if needed. Check if the metrics are relevant and bringing value. Finally, check if those metrics are worth the time invested to generate them. Metrics will be useful for both the sponsor and the CRO. This will be a way for the team to demonstrate that they are striving for excellence and that they achieve goals. A satisfaction survey will measure the efficacy of the relationship. Beforehand, you need to define what you expect from the survey and how you want to proceed. It will give the team members a voice. Quantitative and qualitative results are equally important to make sure you get reportable scores showing overall satisfaction and comments providing valuable in-depth insight into particular areas. This will help to identify specific pain points in the relationship and highlight process improvement needs. You should also favor anonymous answers. It's less intimidating for the team members, so will probably be more honest. A second step, you need to define who will participate in the survey. Well, both parties, sponsor and CRO, should be involved in there. Based on the first two steps, the data which needs to be collected will be identified. You are now all set to collect and analyze the data. But when should this happen? Definitively at the end of the project, a type of lessons learned. But for long-lasting projects, this should be performed on a regular basis. For example, when milestones are achieved or at defined frequency, such as yearly or every 2 years. The last steps are equally important. You really need to communicate the results, plan for action, and put them in place. And finally, this process can be repeated if necessary at a specified frequency. Conclusion. So what have we seen today? First, that the communication remains the major key in managing the relationship. That to establish a partnership, the goals and expectations on both sides need to be shared. The partner selection is an important step as you want to enter a long-lasting relationship, and the right CRO will depend on sponsor expectations. Metrics need to be agreed upon and will help addressing issues. A satisfaction survey will help to improve the collaboration. And finally, I did not insist on this, but a project manager on both sides will help ensure the above specified items are conducted. The conclusion is that it's not a question of outsourcing tasks, but instead partnering with individuals. Trust is key in this in this process. And I thank you for your attention. And I'm ready to take any question.
Thank you, Pierre. You might hear Pierre and me exchanging headsets. We had an issue with the first one, so you might hear a little bit of ruffling here and there. We have received a few questions, and Pierre, I'll read them out to you. The first one is, oh, by the way, if you want to send a question, you have a chat box at the bottom there, and you can just send your question. You made it clear that communication is important. Do you think that a face-to-face meeting is really necessary from that perspective?
Well, yes. Communication indeed is really key. I can't insist enough on that. Regarding face-to-face meeting, I think having an initial face-to-face meeting is really beneficial for the relationship, and this will really influence the rest of the communication during the duration of the project. When you put a face on a name and on a voice, you will see that the behavior will be completely different. People will be much more open and will be more direct in the communication. So I would really recommend to have a face-to-face meeting when it's possible.
Okay. The next question is, what would be a reasonable amount of time to ask for quotes and information before the start of a study?
Oh, okay, that's an interesting question. Actually, that depends. Well, yeah, I think you can't. The only recommendation I can give you is that you need to ensure to give enough information to your provider, to your vendors, to your providers, to give them enough information and enough time in order for them to prepare a robust proposal, which will avoid bad surprise during the study, and which will avoid having too many amendments during the study. In terms of recommendation, a reasonable amount of time, well, if you give all the information from the beginning, I guess it's best if you can give them something like 2 weeks, so that they have the time to really analyze the request, to prepare something, to come up with questions, to revise the assumptions, to have an agreement on the assumptions with you, and then finally come up with a good final proposal for your project.
Another interesting question here. How do you address potential problems with your vendor? What is the best method? Email? What would you say, Pierre?
Well, definitely not emails. The best recommendation is pick up the phone. It's the first thing to do. Also, there is no need to go for escalation to the management immediately. You should keep that as a second step if things are not improving as expected. So I think the first thing is that you should give the direct feedback to the team, to your interlocutors, that there is an issue and that you want to address that. If this doesn't bring to anything, I think the project manager, if there is one, which I recommend, should be informed and should manage that, because it's not up to the sponsor to micromanage the vendor staff. So I think the question should be, well, the problem should be relayed to the project manager who needs to handle with the problem internally within the vendor. If it does not satisfy your expectation, then you are always free to escalate the request, and finally, maybe if in the worst case, to go and to come on site at the vendor for an audit or to evaluate the issues.
Questions are still coming in. There's one interesting one here. Would you recommend a single point of contact in the CRO and at the sponsor, or a team?
Well, both. I think it's best to have the team involved in the. When I mentioned the regular TCs, the regular communication to be put in place, I think the team needs to be involved because, make no mistake, the team working at the CRO, for them, it's their project too. They are not just machine doing work from 8 to 5. No, they really care about the project. So they like to be involved and to be consulted. No, for any issues, I think having a single point of contact where you can relay the issues that you have identified is good.
That's all we have for the moment in terms of questions. Now, thank you for having participated in this webinar. Very, very grateful for that. If you do have, oh, sorry, just one more quick one coming up here. How do you get out of a relationship which is not working? Ah.
Okay. How will I address that? When a relationship is not working, I think I already partially addressed that with the question about the problems and how to address them. I think that's the way you need to address the same. You can address in the same way issues within the relationship. So you start escalating the issue, and if it's not working at all, I think you might consider stopping the relationship and moving to another vendor. This is a difficult decision because that implies cost. Because if you leave a vendor in the middle of a project, going to a new one, this will imply extra cost. But sometimes going for that extra cost is cheaper than messing up the entire project if you can't find a way out in your relationship.
Okay, Pierre, that's it now. So again, thank you for having participated in this webinar. When you close the webinar, you will see a panel which will come up with a survey. We'd be grateful if you can fill that in, and if you have any further questions, please put them in there, and we'll come back to you with the answers, obviously. So thank you, and bye for now.